Okay, looks like we're going live. Let me make sure that I can see everybody. Let's see here. A couple of folks in there already. And pop out the chat. Alrighty. Bam. All right. I think we're ready to rock.
Are you still going to fire up the Zoom?
No Zoom today. We'll keep it Discord because since it's just you and me, it's easy. It's super easy to manage. I only do
I just want to adjust my camera a little bit because I'm a little far from the.
Yeah, however you want is fine. I've got I can zoom you in or out too if needed, but whatever you want to adjust is great, and I can work around it.
To you, I don't know the Discord controls really well, if there are any.
You look pretty good now. I guess you are a little low. There you go. Let's see. Yeah, I can actually. Oh, that's perfect. Actually, that's great.
Cool.
Okay. Excellent. Here goes, everyone. Is everything queued? Yeah. All right. We are recording audio. We are recording backup, and it is time. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Fantastic Pixel Castle and Frog Pants Studios presents Word on the Street with Greg Street and Scott Johnson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Word on the Street with Scott Johnson and Greg Street. And that's our guest. The two of us today are the guest. It's us. How do you feel about
Old
that,
school.
Greg? Yeah, it's like, I don't know, what's this like? This is like back in the day when we do a little interview or something. And
I like it. I'm vain, so I like it when all the attention is on me and I don't have to share the spotlight at all, so it works fine.
You're one of the least vain people I know, so I don't believe you at all when you say that. He's a humble, nice guy making video games, you guys. Hey, we're here to talk about stuff. I've kind of semi-titled this episode Milestones because, you know, as the development of Ghost goes along, there are, you know, certainly milestones to hit. You guys have hit a few probably that we're going to talk about today. But really it is just down to let's talk to Greg about the state of things. What's going on? What are the philosophies today versus when things started? Have they changed? That sort of thing. Before we get too deep, though, I was just curious if you have returned to your old stomping grounds and played the new WoW expansion at all. You given that a shot at all?
I have not. I hear good things, and I know several people on the team are playing it, so I've paid attention to, you know, it's gotten really good reviews, and so I'm like, well, what is it? Is it a feature? Is it the writing? Is it the story? Is it just everyone's thankful to be underground again? So
yeah, I wonder about that because I'm a big Subterranean player. I like that a lot, and
same.
so I'm super stoked about caves and stuff. And I didn't know what to expect with this one, and I have to say they've really nailed that particular part of it really well. I think the game is in a really good place, and it's interesting to see the old long in the tooth game having a pretty good 20th year. And I think it plays in a little bit to some of the conversation we're going to have today about what is an MMO in 2024 without 20 years of baggage and building and, you know, and even in some cases retroactivity, like becoming a classic game at the same time that it's a modern game and all these sorts of things. And I don't know, it's funny. My playtime in the new expansion has been times where I just sort of go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if Ghost will do that, or I wonder if Ghost will avoid that. You know, there's some things in these older games that feel permanent and unmovable, and in some ways maybe that's good. It's, you know, part of their tradition or part of their legacy. And then there are things in them where you're like, I wish that was gone, but it's kind of lodged in there. You know, it's like bones.
And we talk about this sometimes because some of the problems Warcraft has, it only has because it's a 20-year-old game.
Yeah.
And if we're ever in the situation where we're talking about our game has endured for 20 years, like, we've already made it. Like, that is success. At that point, it's really hard to say, oh, there's all these problems. It's like, yeah, your game has been popular for 20 years.
Well, that's an interesting point. When you're talking about games of this magnitude, ones that are sort of a service that continues for a long time and hopefully the kind of length that differs from your regular old video game releases where You might get a popular game and then 2 years later get a sequel, and then you don't hear about it for a while, and then maybe you get a remaster. I mean, that's usually those kind of game lifespans. This is different though. This is like an on all the time, constantly being updated, constantly being improved sort of experience. And time is part of that, is part of the structure of what makes an MMO.
Oh
And
yeah.
you guys are just like at that very tip. You are 2003 working on an MMO to compare it to WoW, not, not where WoW is, where it's got 20 years of experience and piled up stuff and everything else. For good or for bad, that's a lot of baggage. Do you think it's, I guess I should ask, does it feel good to have all of that ahead of you instead of behind you? You're not locked into things that, were either technologies you had to deal with of the day or whatever those things may be. Does it feel more like an open field for you to explore?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, part of it's freeing just because the design problems are all new, because we can look at, well, WoW had this design problem, so we don't want that, So instead we're gonna have all these new problems most of we haven't discovered yet.
Yeah.
But at least they're new problems, not the same ones we've been banging our head against for decades.
And we really never talked about it too in depth here because we usually jump straight to guests and stuff, or get to some very specifics around the edges of the game. But at this stage, you've had some time. There's been some play testing, prototyping, all of that. And I'm curious if the philosophy, your initial philosophy for this game, has changed during that time. And maybe for some of those, just for those who are listening, maybe for the first time, maybe they'd benefit from some of that thinking. Remind them of where your head was at when you started, and how do you think that's going at this stage?
Yeah, it's remarkable because my kind of success as a game designer has never been as the idea guy. My success has always been, well, let's dig into the details here and find something that really works. So let's come up with a clever solution to a problem. But I was never the one pitching like, I've seen the future and it's this new feature we have to add to the game.
Right.
The Blue Zone design was kind of that feature for Ghost. It was from the very earliest pitches, there was this idea of the best part of MMOs are other players. The worst part of MMOs are other players. So can we kind of divide the game up into two, where there's a part that's very, very focused around other players, and we don't want to get rid of that. But then the other half of the game is a more private experience for you and your friends, where you don't have to worry about other people coming along and killing the boss you were about to kill, or mining the resource node you're about to mine. And I know some people will hear this and be like, but that's what MMOs are about. And we're like, yes, you're right. And that's why we're going to offer all of that. But we're also going to offer a more kind of focused private experience where the spotlight is really on you.
Yeah.
And that has endured. Like, that philosophy hasn't changed. The playtesting we've done, and I think we're going to talk about playtesting maybe an upcoming episode or two, but the playtesting we've done is like really validated for us that design is a keeper. Like, we're going forward with the Blue Zone, Red Zone core loop of Ghost because players like it.
Yeah. So is that how, I guess that's how you get that feedback. You do the prototyping, you play the game, and then you have that realization that your early ideas were good, that they were solid. You can't just get that with I don't know, making art and designing levels. You have to experience some of that, even though some of it might be stock art and might be, assets that you pulled from Unreal or whatever, but you can still get a sense, I suppose, that helps you either confirm or deny that your original plan for these blue zones and that more focused experience was a good idea or not.
Yeah, we use the word squint a lot because you have to squint. Like, none of the assets in the game are ours. They're still all Unreal assets. We just hired our animator a few weeks ago, so now we can actually start putting our content in the game. So when we have playtesters, we have to ask them, like, we don't want to talk about the art because there's nothing for you to see, but let's talk about this experience you did where you were running around a blue zone and you had objectives and it was a small group of you and you knew you're going to group back up with a larger group at the end. Did that excite you? Do you see yourself wanting to do that for dozens or hundreds or 1,000 hours? And yeah, they have to squint. The experience is not great yet, but they say, like, this seems like it has a ton of potential, which is which is great. That's what we want.
Well, you mentioned that players are often the strength and the weakness of an MMO, which some are going to take it to be more cynical than I think is meant. But you've been around this stuff long enough, done it for enough years to understand really what that means. Obviously, you benefit from a ton of years at Blizzard and Riot and other places where you've had to balance that, figure that out. I assume even at Ensemble there was a lot of issues about, well, in player versus player RTSs, what does this manifest like? Well, it turns out we have people rage quitting matches. Well, now we need systems to deal with that. Like, I assume that's been lessons learned over many years of experience. That seems like a big advantage for you doing a brand new game, to be able to just dive into this and go, well, we already know that players get toxic in situation A. So in situation A, we're going to do, X, Y, and Z to alleviate that from the get-go, because we already know this from 12 years ago when we implemented it in WoW or something. I guess I'm asking if that feels like that should not hurry you guys up, but that feels like it should give you an advantage, and you're not starting from scratch like EverQuest or something where you don't even really have an engine yet. You're just sort of like, everything's a big amorphous nothing because we don't know how this is all going to pan out. You've got those lessons. So myself and players, I think, assume a lot about that, or what that may do to accelerate the process. Or is it fair for us to feel that way?
It does. The production rubric, I don't know a better way to describe it. The way we decided to approach this game was, we're not going to innovate everywhere, because I've been at places like Blizzard and Riot, and when they try to over innovate, what that means is the game doesn't ship for a decade. And we absolutely want to ship this game. And so the way to do that is to really call your shots. The blue zones are in some ways a substitute for leveling in the quest experience. We're really trying to make that part fresh. We're innovating in combat a little bit because we think combat is stale. World of Warcraft's dungeons are fantastic. Like,
sure,
we call that a side-in, where we're just going to do that. Like, we don't need to come up with the most genre-defining party system or guild system in the world. Like, players expect to have banks. Players expect to have inventory systems. Like, we're just going to add that because it's kind of MMO standards, and then we'll be very explicit where we are trying to do something new. And that should keep the innovation time to something reasonable and something that doesn't spill out for 5 or 10 years because someone like me comes into work and it's like, I have a great idea. Stop the presses. We're going to go in a different direction.
Sure. That reminds me of something. Back in around 2014, I suppose it was, you were at one of my live shows at BlizzCon, and this was the event where you mentioned that people may not be flying right away in the next expansion, which was Warlords of Draenor. And there was quite an uproar over that. And we heard about it for months on our show anyway, and people just freaking out. And I had a very different approach, or a very different feeling about it, which was I understood where you guys were coming from. I understood why flying, while awesome, also had this diminishing effect on the content and made things a little too like God mode. You see everything from the top, you fly in, whatever, you're not really experiencing the world. And I agreed with it. Like, philosophically, I think you guys were right to make that change. It's interesting all these years later, so we're 10 years after that, and the innovation or the way around it now, after many years of you need to unlock flying after a period of time, is now you have a new kind of flying right away. In I guess they call it skywriting now. It's dragon flying in the last expansion. And what you unlock later with a Pathfinder unlock is that you end up being able to get your old hover way of flying back in those zones. But up until then, you got to zoom around, which has its own challenges. So the reason I'm bringing all that up is not to ask about flight or mounts or anything like that. That will come with time as you guys explore that more. But what I'm curious about is when things like that change in other games while you guys are mid-development, how many eyes do you have on that? I mean, I know you have a lot of fans on staff who play games of various kinds. Do you guys get to come to the table and go, you guys, they've made it so flying makes sense now, and here's how they did it. We should think about that when we get to that stage, or whatever the feature set may be or change may be. Do you feel like you benefit from that, even though you're out of those companies now and you're doing your own thing? Do you have to pay attention to what all that is and what's going on?
Oh, 100%. And unfortunately, not just MMOs. You have to pay attention to, well, this is now player expectations from Baldur's Gate 3 or player expectations from Helldivers. Like, any game can like innovate or polish something really well, and now that kind of becomes the new accepted standard. Everyone right now is talking about the amazing character customization in the new Dragon Age, Veilguard.
Right.
And so we're like, okay, this is the table stakes now. If we deliver something that's very subpar to that in terms of character customization, players are going to feel like, hey, we're a little disappointed by this.
Sure.
And it's okay to disappoint players. You just need to like be very careful where you do that. If you disappoint them everywhere across the board, they're not going to play the game. They may be willing to forgive your character customization isn't the best if your combat is really good, but you know, again, you have to be pretty careful about where you're going to give on that.
Do you think you have like a hardened shell over the years where not customer, but player feedback kind of just rolls off you? You don't take it personally. Like, you were kind of known for this at Blizzard, but I'm curious if now like that stuff even sways you. Obviously, you want the best thing for the game, but do complaints or freakouts or any of that stuff, that probably doesn't scare you anymore, does it?
No, the freakouts don't scare me, and I can let a lot of that stuff roll off. I want the game to be a success, and part of the reason we are showing it to players so early and talking about it, having a podcast, things like that, is we want to hear the signal. If players say, dude, I'm excited about your game, but I'm really nervous about the way you're handling combat, or I'm not sure I'm sold on the idea of having lots and lots of classes. Like, we would much rather hear that feedback now than be on the defensive after the game ships and then we're like promising, oh, we'll patch it later, you know?
Mm-hmm. There's a question in the chat I really like. It kind of switches gears a little bit, but it's in this kind of thinking of how are you guys affected in real time about what you see versus what you put in the game. Evan Fardreamer in the chat says, piggybacking off that question more broadly, how does the Ghost team intend to tackle staples like trade skills and crafting for other players? How would you answer that?
We have to have an answer for all of that stuff. The trade skill one in particular, I took the forefront of the design on that because there is this fantasy in MMOs that you can kind of become the titan of industry, that you are the person with the best enchant, or you're the person that can craft the helmet, and people are going to come from miles around to like have you make the helmet for them. And we had to decide, do we want to deliver on that fantasy, or is this somewhere where we're going to say, yeah, you're going to craft things because crafting is probably core enough to the MMO genre that we need it, but are we going to deliver that specific fantasy of like, I have the head enchant that everyone is asking me for or not?
Yeah, people been begging, like in the WoW case, people begged for housing for as long as the game has existed. Who knows if they ever do anything? It feels like 20 years in, if they haven't yet, will they ever? Do you feel pressure to have housing on day one in this game?
We will have housing because our game just works so well for that design. Like, one of the nice things you can do on Blue Zones is build on them because you don't have to worry about other players. So you build bridges or towers or things like that. And so it's not a big leap from you can build that to like you can build a cottage or even a village. So because we're taking some aspects from the survival genre, that's built in on day one. Like, I don't know that we'll have mounts. We probably want to have pet battles. We're not going to have every feature in the game, but housing is something we'll have early on.
So that leads me to another question. And you said something on Twitter recently about this, how important it was for the game to have its end game figured out before anything else happens or launches. That you can't launch a game with a beautiful world, amazing quest design, great leveling experience. Like, that's all awesome. But if you don't have an answer for level, whatever your level is going to be, let's say it's 50. When people hit 50, now what? Where do we go now? What do we do? A lot of MMOs live and die on that. They either have something ready or they don't, or what they have ready is subpar compared to perhaps the competition. Maybe expand a little bit more on that part of the philosophy and tell me more about how important that is.
I think what a lot of, I have the extreme joy of having never worked on a failed MMO, so I'm speculating a little here. I've only worked on one real MMO that launched, which was WoW.
Sure.
You tend to make the game the way historically you tend to make the game the way you play the game, which is, well, we'll start at low level, we'll go to high level. So let's build our start zone, then we'll build zone 2, then we'll build zone 3, and when we reach zone 50, we ship the game. And while players are leveling up, now we'll go make the end game, which is just risky for all sorts of reasons. The big one is players probably get to endgame faster than you think. And if your endgame is weak, they probably figure that out very quickly. And now you're back in the defensive of like, oh, we'll patch it. Oh, like, just please don't churn. We'll fix the endgame. And the endgame is so hard to fix. So we, one of like I try not to make a ton of mandates. One of my mandates to the team is like, we'll have endgame figured out before we ship, and players will test it. Like we need to have our play testers at max level going through the endgame experience and telling us of like, yeah, I would play this for days, weeks, months.
Yeah.
And if not, the game's not ready to ship.
Interesting. Do you figure that test? I mean, I don't know how you guess this sort of thing, but having been through, a testable product cycle with WoW, how long do you think that'll take? If you just had to guess, obviously it's a twisting, turning road to get to a release ready game. But do you picture years of beta testing, months of beta testing? What do you prefer happen in all that?
I think it needs to be years, but that doesn't mean we finish the game and then go into like years of playtesting. Like we're already playtesting. We plan to playtest every month. We would love to keep playtesting every month indefinitely. And I am really looking forward to the day when we say, hey, not only do we have playtesters, but there's no NDA. And what the hell, if you want to stream it, that's fine. Because then we get even more exposure to more and more players. And then we'll quickly hit the point where like, yeah, your character's persistent. Like you don't have to start a new character every time, which means at that point we'll have a lot of high level players running around, and then we can really start testing the end game loop as well.
Man, it sounds hard. I know you guys are all professionals, but that part sounds tricky. Like the parts that sound easy to me are still technically hard, but what sounds easy to me, again, sounds, not is, but what sounds easy is a great leveling experience. Beautiful character design, amazing animations, wonderful sound work and music. All that. That all sounds like stuff video game makers make and do. Where this sounds cobwebby is that dividing line of you've come this far and now what? now what do you want to do? And clearly having the Blue Zone concept as one of your founding pillars here is helpful in this regard, because if that sticks, that's a huge part of what your end game pipeline looks like, right? Like that's all connected. Yeah, so that's exciting to me.
And we'll have we'll have dungeons and raids and things like that. Our hope is that we don't need, I was going to say as many of them, but it's really not even about quantity. It's about, we hope that's not the whole focus where, and I haven't played the most recent expansion, but when I played World of Warcraft, you would level, and then a player like me, you would raid, and you would, oh, it's raiding night, I'm going to log in. It's not raiding night. Well, maybe I'll level and all, but probably I'll play a different game. And we think we can offer more than that. Like rather than the game kind of narrowing as you get to end game, it really should expand, and you should have more and more options at end game. And we think Blue Zones should be a great alternative to go get like real quote unquote gear on the nights that your group isn't raiding.
Gotcha. Like that's an interesting part of this quote unquote philosophy discussion we're having today, because as it currently stands, I think perhaps this new expansion of WoW is the best it's ever been for what you can do at endgame. There are many options now, and the new delve system's really good, I think. And it gives more people more opportunities to do more things. But if you really take a long view of it, it is still sort of gear chase. It's just which path do you want to take to get that gear, right?
And the last time I really engaged in Warcraft was Shadowlands, which I know I enjoyed. I know it's a controversial expansion, but there was a lot of tension at Endgame between the Mythic Dungeon folks and the Raid folks, because the Raiders would say, well, it's not fair that the Mythic Dungeon folks would get gear just as much as we get with a boss that they don't have to wipe on 100 times. And of course, the Raider, the Dungeon people would say the same thing. It's like, well, there's only 5 of us. We all have to be on the top of our game. We can't carry anyone. And there was an argument about, well, should you just be able to run dungeons and not run raids, and vice versa? So there's sometimes I think rewards are like the most important part of any MMO design, because that really is telling players what content they should engage in. And as soon as you put the good rewards on PvP, you're pushing everyone into PvP. And as soon as you put the good rewards in delves, you're pushing everyone into delves. And it's really hard to say, do some of everything, but do the stuff you enjoy the most, do that a little more.
Yeah, and if you make them all have the same rewards, then you're just homogenizing everything in a way that makes the player just kind of go, well,
it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, like none of this matters. Which brings us to another really important philosophical point about prior Endgame, meaning, I've logged in, I'm level 1. What's this game going to do for me? Darren in the chat says, can we have leveling that matters rather than just be done in 5 hours? Endgame is slightly less of an issue if it's not the only thing to do after day 1. This is a big, not controversy, a big conversation that happens around MMOs, whether or not the leveling process, the role-playing, traditional role-playing part of the game has been sped up too much, or isn't hard, or doesn't present the usual challenges. I think that's probably got a lot of deep-seated issues with, like, people want hard, then they're going to go play Elden Ring because they're going to want to bang their head against that. And if they want that in an MMO, they're not going to like it. They're not going to stick around very long because it's just a different presentation, it's a different interfacing or whatever. And so then they all say, well, back in vanilla, it was harder, and I liked it when it was harder. And I'm old enough to remember when everybody thought WoW was the baby MMO, because when you died, all you had to do was corpse run, and your stuff was all intact. You didn't lose XP like a lot of other games were experimenting with. And so I always try to keep that perspective, right? This stuff's always shifting around. Everybody thinks they played it the hardest or the best time or whatever. To bring it back around, though, how important at this stage, philosophically and practically, is it for that leveling experience to be either longer or at the least more of a meaningful experience that had the right balance of challenge and the right balance of reward and satisfaction getting to the end, and simply not just a wall of XP that you have to burn through?
Yeah, so 2 ways to answer that. Earlier, when we were talking about kind of World of Warcraft gets to have these problems because the game has been around so long and is so successful, they have a huge audience, and they know that some of that audience is only there for Endgame. So they tell them, well, you need to level up. You could do it really quickly and get to dungeons and raids because that's what you want to do. Likewise, I saw them say, well, we know not everyone wants to engage in the story, so we're going to make the story very short so that everyone will get through it.
Yeah.
And one of the advantages of not having an audience at all at this point is we really get to pick and choose. So we're choosing to say, you have to play through our story. Sorry, if you don't like the story, maybe this isn't the game for you. And likewise, leveling's going to take a while. Like, it's not going to be brutal. It's not going to be that, your success rate is low, but it's not going to be something you're done with in a weekend either. It'll probably take a while, 30, 40 hours to get to max level. But then that leads to my second point, which is one of the things I've learned, particularly in MMO design, is you can always go from more conservative to more progressive, but you can never go the other way. So if you make leveling take too long, you can always make it shorter. But if it's short and you're like, gosh, I really wish we'd made it take longer, that is a really hard sell to players.
Yeah.
Just like you can't say, oh man, flying makes the game too easy, we're going to take flying away. It's just, that's a really hard sell.
Yeah, I don't know how. Honestly, it's still to this day. It was one of the most. I don't know if the word politically is the right word, but it was the most controversial thing that I think players had dealt with up to a point. Maybe the real ID name system thing that was proposed and pulled. Right. That was pretty controversial. But as an actual game mechanic infused game thing, I think pulling flight was massive. I also happen to believe it was the right thing to do at the time. So I guess your goal and goals of new games are to anticipate some of that or learn from these sort of things and, maybe handle it differently. But here's
play testers tell us, hey, I like Ghost, but leveling takes way too long and I'm bored, or your story kind of sucks, I'm not engaged. Well, again, we'd love to hear that so we have time to fix it.
Right. Oh, you hate to hear that one, though. Your story sucks. You don't want that at all. Okay, so if this makes me go back to your players are the power and the problem thing. If you say to me in a single player game of some sort, we're making a really compelling story and leveling experience, it kind of doesn't matter too much how quickly someone decides to burn through it or not, because they're having a personal experience. Sure, they can stream it today, and there's speedrunners, and there's different ways that it's now public. But
Right.
but traditionally, it's I sit down with this game, I play it at whatever speed I want to play it. I'm having fun, I'm enjoying it. I'm not really there to rat race my way to the end. To me, it seems like folly a little bit to try to control that, because you are always going to have some percentage, and I assume it's a fairly large percentage, but some percentage of players whose entire goal is to get in and make the numbers go up as fast as they can. They don't care. They're just like, let's go. We're running, both feet on the ground, no stopping for nobody. I don't care how compelling your story is or how many little sort of blocks get in the way that are meant to slow my progression. I'm going to be level 50 in 3 days, whether you like it or not. Do you just accept that as a developer and just say, I guess that's just the way that is?
To some extent, like if they're having fun, great. If that's what's compelling in the game about them. It gets to be a problem if players begin to accept that that's the only way to play, or the most efficient way to play. Like back in my day, there was a lot of stress that you wouldn't get invited to the raid if you didn't gear up quickly. So you would plow to Endgame to start getting the blues and purples for your character so that you would, get to be one of the starting roster. I think WoW has wisely addressed that by like raids stay locked out for a little bit now. So everyone, if you want to race through, that's great. But if you want to take a little bit more time, you can do that.
Sure. A lot of people like a list and to check them off and just get stuff done. I do this. Yeah. Now that maps in MMOs are full of check marks and, indicators and targets, it gives me, it's like an Ubisoft game. I can just get in there and go, oh, I can see all the towers I need to unlock. I can see this area I haven't done yet. There are 50 quests in it there, and now there are only 12 because I've whittled it down. For whatever reason, I like to play like that. I like to clear the place out and know that I did it all. And it's
satisfying to kind of make order out of chaos, to like make all the little problems on the map go away.
Yeah, it feels like my impact on the world was felt because those things are done. Those characters have been talked to. Those guys have been killed and assassinated, whatever it is, I've done it. And along the way, I've earned gear or I've earned reputation or I've done whatever I've done. There are bound to be players. I know there are players, friends of mine, who hate that. They can't stand the quote unquote, however it's presented, list of things to get done. They don't like that. They just want to get in and go, wow, look at this place. Oh, I've discovered something. You didn't have to point me here. I just ran into an NPC who says, help, my house is on fire, whatever. And you go help them put it out and do whatever you got to do, and you get gold for it. How do you balance that? What's the philosophy there? How do you keep those meticulous completionists happy? At the same time, those other ones are happy.
One of the hardest things about MMO design is that you need a broad audience. I mean, the games are expensive. You want to have a decent sized audience. And if you have an MMO with not a lot of players, it's not really massive, right? You're not seeing, you're going to all these dead zones. You're not running into a lot of other players. So on the one hand, you need a lot of people, but you still don't want to be like all things to all people. Like I think that's a real risk of these games to say, well, we know people are only in this for the story. How do we make sure they can see the story? Or we know there's only players who are only in this for PvP and they never want to set foot in a quest or a dungeon. How do we make the experience for them? So you're constantly kind of balancing these two extremes of we know players have different motivations. We need to speak to those motivations, but we also can't say, no matter what you like in your MMO, you'll find it in our game, because it's just not true.
Sure.
So for example, we're taking a stand on things like, we're going to have a story. You probably are going to have to experience it. We're going to have leveling that's maybe a little longer than you're used to. You're probably going to have to experience it and things like that.
Right. Well, I think people will be excited about that part. I think an extended leveling experience is a good thing. I can't speak for everybody, but I do have somebody in the chat who I know personally, one of my co-hosts on the Core podcast. It's Bo Schwartz, who asked this question, and I really like this one because he and I are kind of in the middle of this in our WoW playing. Any ideas about meaningful, special, rare, unique items versus incremental eye-level reskin stat sticks? It's low enticement after going after +3 eye level for the 100th time. Endgame just moves leveling to eye level. To his first point specifically, though, there is a tendency in these games to just get into what is essentially, it's not time gated, but it's sort of stat gated. It's like, well, in the same way that you can't run heroic versions of a dungeon until you've done normal, and then you can't do mythic until you've done heroic. There's that kind of stepping stone. But it's also with the gear itself. It's like, well, I've killed this boss 15 times. Twice it gave me the 2 items I needed, but they're still pretty low. And now I got to wait until the next content drop before I can go up another 3 points or whatever. What are the philosophies floating around in that regard? Obviously, this is very late game, so you may not have had that much discussion about it, but I'd be curious if you guys have.
We've talked about it a lot because it gets into what I was saying before about rewards are so important, and the reward design really kind of dictates where players want to spend their time. What we would like to do is have lots and lots of unique items with special abilities, with unusual behavior. Like, those are harder to make. Like, the reason WoW doesn't make more of them is they're hard. Yeah. Not always necessarily in just like opening up the editor and making the thing, but deciding on issues of fairness. Like, if this is the Fire Mage's best in slot trinket, but it's super duper rare and not many people can get it, how angry are the players for whom it never drops? So I think we will, I predict it's their design. It may not pan out, but what we're going for now is we want to have lots of different items and make it a little less about the throughput of having a slightly higher item level. Like, we might have something like item level just to help players understand whether something is better or worse. But for example, our trinket slot, which is not called that, will probably be not class specific. It'll probably be like anyone can pick it up, a lot more like the slots in a Dark Souls game. So, which they call, I don't know, variously talismans or things like that.
Right. No, I like that.
If they're not class specific, then their value varies a lot depending on the on the player. If you're someone who has a fast swinging melee attack and the item procs on frequency of hits, it's just going to benefit some classes more than others. And we think that'll be fun for players to kind of discover and experiment with and try things out that way.
There is an aspect to the competition between players that is just walking into town and seeing somebody on a mount or wearing gear that you don't have, and you're like, what the frick is this guy doing? And now you're obsessed with not being as cool as that dude, and so you want to go earn what he's got. That's unavoidable, isn't it? Like, you just there's no way. If you're going to give somebody a meaningful reward, they're going to have to, visually or otherwise, they're going to want what he has.
That's the joy of, you get something awesome and then you go strut around the city and people, in your mind, they come up to you and they're like, that's awesome, you're so lucky, or where'd you get that? It looks really cool, or nice transmog, man. Like, that is the part where I say that other players are the best part of an MMO, because that validation is real. And I think as humans, we like it when we get noticed or people compliment us or things like that. And you can't get that in a single player game.
Yeah. I guess that doesn't have to all be toxic EP sort of strutting that people do. Sometimes it's just straight up cool toy. Where'd you get it?
I think, this is where it's easy for us to look at WoW and say it's a very single target throughput based game. So getting more agility, getting more crit, getting more whatever always just makes you do more damage. The damage is the only thing that matters. So therefore, item level is the only thing that matters. Like, I don't think it has to be that way.
Right.
Even in Diablo, it's a little less that way, where the specific item or the other items that have synergy with your item is kind of more important than just like make number go up.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to bring this up. One of the strengths, I think, of the 2.0 loot fixes that happened in Diablo back in the day, 2014 or so, obviously fixed a bunch of issues that were tied to a plan for a shop that didn't work out and all of that. So it's not exactly your normal scenario. But regardless, what I liked about it was some of the philosophy around it. And if I remember right, the team lead at the time, forgot his name. He was great, though. Love that guy. Forgot his name. Anyway, I think he went off with Pardo for his thing. Anyway,
Josh Mascara?
Josh, that's it.
Yeah.
He said in an interview or somewhere that they stopped caring about making sure all these characters were precisely balanced with one another. Not characters, but these classes. And so if you had, for some reason, a legendary thing drop that did just crazy procs on whatever, I don't know, I can't even think of a scenario, but let's just say a barbarian was just suddenly just OP and could just curb stomp everything. they got to this philosophy where they're like, yeah, that's okay, it's fine. Like, go ahead and
Right.
go roll a, go roll one of those guys if you're jealous of what they can do when they do a certain shout or something. By the same token, wizards might suddenly just be completely overpowered because now they can repeat 3 abilities in a row, and they've never been able to do that, and it just lays waste. And who's that hurting? Nobody, because you don't have to think about those balances. But you're making an MMO where often PvP is expected, right? And not just PvP, but balanced PvP.
Right.
I feel like that's a hindrance. Like if anything has held WoW back in some previous eras, and seen some really smart people grapple with it, including people that work with Ghost now. What a pain to do that, because you want to, on the one hand you want to go let it rip, and on the other hand you're like, well, what if these two duel? Now we got a problem. How are you guys dealing with that whole thing?
One decision we made early on is we're just not going to obsess about fairness and balance as much, at least early on. Another place this manifests is like, we want to have a lot of classes. Like maybe we have 30 or 40 classes at launch. And so the artist asked, well, what if we come up with a really cool art set for the one class? Do we then have to make one for everyone else? And I'm like, no, like that class will feel awesome if you make them a cool art set.
Right.
And then maybe next time you make another cool art set. And we even did this a little bit on League of Legends, where we would make, legendary skins for some champions and others just wouldn't get one. And yeah, it's not fair, but the alternative is nobody gets anything cool. So let's just do it.
Yeah. I worry about
likewise,
that.
Like we'll have PvP. I don't think it's going to be esport level of balance. In fact, I'm sure it's not. So if not every class is super viable, if certain, comps are better than others, we're just going to kind of accept that as in order to make the game fun and dynamic and have players go explore optimal builds and gear, that's kind of the consequence, because the alternative is everything is so balanced that it doesn't matter. Like no matter what item you pick up, no matter what spell you use, it doesn't matter. You're going to kind of be the same effectiveness.
Yeah.
And I think that really kills the sense of theory crafting and exploration that players really like to do.
Yeah, it does for me. So I agree with that philosophy. Mika in our chat, who's always here, says 30 plus classes at launch is crazy. Maybe we can get into that a little bit. Was that always the idea, is to have that many? I mean, that's a lot for a launch.
That was always the idea. Yeah. WoW got to the point where, the spec, the ret paladin matters more than the paladin. So you already have a lot of classes. And I felt like one of the things I learned from my time on League of Legends is that you can make an awful lot of characters if you're just willing to kind of focus them a little more and make them like really, really specialized in certain things. Mm-hmm. So for example, we probably won't have a pet class that's like master of any pets. Instead, we might have, well, this pet class is a falconer and they have a pet bird, and this pet class has a pet cat, and things like that. It lets us specialize a little bit more so that when a new class comes out, it's kind of fun to go try them.
Right.
Like likewise, we might have a crossbow specialist and a longbow specialist, and not just a generic archer that can pick up any bow.
Oh, see, that was going to be my question, is how that, because I'm trying to think, you only have so many fantasy archetypes, I suppose, but there's
a lot of fantasy archetypes. I think the problem often is they, WoW always believes in concentrating the coolness. So they kind of take everything and say, well, if you're a plate wearer with a weapon, you're a warrior. So that all has to fit in this one class. Games like Gloomhaven, Darkest Dungeon, Pathfinder, they don't adhere to that. They try to like make the classes like unique and really cool and sometimes even a little weird. And I just think that is an interesting space to go to help differentiate Ghost and kind of encourage people to try out lots of different things, which worked pretty well for League of Legends.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's it. I was going to ask if League of Legends is informing a lot of this. It sounds like it is, because you kind of
League can do a lot with relatively few abilities. Like we think we'll probably have more abilities in our classes than a League champion, which theoretically has 4. The classes in WoW, I don't know how many they have these days, but it's like 30 abilities or something like that. I'm pretty sure you don't need that many abilities to make a cool class. Maybe you need 7 or 8,
Yeah.
something like that, and
Yeah,
you can add a lot of depth.
I mean, even according to, you go to something like Icy Veins, they really only encourage a rotation of, 5 or 6 or something, which I also don't like, because then it's like, well, wait, what about this huge bag of other ideas you got sitting here that aren't even on my bar because you're telling me they're not stat significant or whatever. I don't know what that balance is, but maybe that balance is a big enough variety of classes with maybe smaller move sets, but that large of a variety of classes makes up for that. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
And again, you just can't worry so much about the fairness.
Yeah.
Sometimes it may just be that a certain boss that everyone cares about, the crossbow person's better than the longbow person, and like people want to have a crossbow person. That's fine as long as you kind of design the game around that expectation of everyone will probably have lots of alts. The alt should be relatively easy to gear up and things like that.
Yeah, that was my big question. Like, when you've got, okay, I'm say I'm a total noob. I launch the game and it says, here are your 35 classes to choose from, and I go, oh man, well, I'd really like to try about 8 of these, but I guess I got to pick one. How much incentive am I going to have to say, go ahead and be comfortable making a pick, get going, and then realize halfway through, boy, I think maybe the crossbow guy was really what I was looking for, and now I'm going to hop over and I'm going to work on that guy. Will I have given myself any advantages with shared reputation, shared XP, shared any of that stuff? Like how much of that has been thought of at this stage of the game? It's pretty early, obviously.
We've thought about it a lot because the question comes up every time we say, well, we want to have lots of classes. People are like, oh, isn't that going to be miserable? And it doesn't have to be. And I think even the warband feature in WoW has solved this a little bit, because you can say that, well, your second character needs less experience,
right,
or all your reputation splashes, or things like that. Like, we've even talked about maybe there's shared inventory to some extent, so that you don't have to worry so much about, did I leave the potion on character 4 or character 7? I think you could solve it if you think about it up front.
Sure.
Now, I don't want to go as extreme as, well, you have the crossbowmen that you never play because they just benefit passively from playing the other characters. Like,
right.
Presumably you still want to go out there and fight and do things with the crossbowmen. So it can't be that you inherit 100% of the progression, but I think you can inherit a lot.
Yeah. I guess there's the balance then there with your philosophy about making a longer leveling experience, but also having this large selection where you're going to have to decide who you're going to do that longer experience with. And if it's too long, then you're really invested in a character that you may not regret, but I just know how my brain works, and I sometimes will
see a shiny object, or like you said, you see someone do something really cool, and you're like, I want to go level that class, and you should be able to do that, and that should be rewarding, not punishing.
Right, and not just a repeat necessarily, or a treadmill, or.
Yeah, I think that's one of the worst things, where people hear alt and they kind of feel ugly about it because they're imagining that they're going to go through and have to replay every quest over again. But because we have this blue zone feature where every time it's different, you shouldn't feel like you're repeating stuff. You should feel like you're seeing something new.
Yeah, and that's exciting, because then what that means is the Pokemon brain could collect them all, in this case, not just collect all the gear for your paladin or collect all the mounts or whatever, but collect all 30 plus of these classes and have equal fun with all of them. Yes. With a bunch of shared aspects. See, that's starting to come together in my head. I like that. Because now I'm feeling encouraged to say, well, I usually go with some sort of range character, but boy, these melees look interesting. Let's fiddle around in there or whatever,
And it's fine to have a main. We're not saying everyone has to play with tons of alts, but again, going back to League of Legends, even if you have a main, there are times when you will play a different champion because maybe that your main got picked or banned or something. So we view it the same as Ghost. You may really love the spear using character, but sometimes you need to swap to your healer. But fortunately, you have a bunch of healers in your stable.
Sure. Now, we did get one other question. Some of this is sort of answered, but I think it's a decent one to ask regardless. This came via text, 801-471-0462. They say this: my name is Essence, a viewer of the Word on the Street podcast series. I've been keeping up with the videos, but haven't caught any live yet, sadly, and I just finished episode 7 of the series. A little late, but I had a question for the team for the next podcast or whenever it may arise. Will Ghost have extensive completionist content akin to, say, Final Fantasy XIV's relic weapon grind? I have to admit I don't know much about the relic weapon grind, other than it's hard to say quickly. Um, but I think what they mean is like, think back to Legion in WoW. That entire endgame was around like building out those epic weapons, those legendary weapons, and it was arguably one of the coolest ideas the game ever had. And it worked really well, and it's why I think Legion was one of the most popular MMOs there were, because that post main game progression was really fun, really meaningful, and very class centric, and all of that. Any thoughts on those kinds of things, class based or otherwise, as part of your end game plans?
So the way we're thinking about Ghost is that someone who plays through like the story and does some end game content can get to like 80% completion, meaning probably 80% of their player power, 80% of the cosmetics and whatever they want out of the game. And then if that type of player wants to take a break until the next expansion comes out, like awesome, they should feel like they've gotten their money's worth.
Sure.
The remaining 20% might be really, really hard to get, like might be a long grind, might be an epic quest, might be a lot of running dungeons or something like that. And that is for the completionist, or the people that really want more to do, or they, God forbid they love Ghost and this is the game they want to play every night. We want to make sure they have those like really long chases. And I think Final Fantasy XIV does a really good job with this, particularly with their cosmetics, because these are things that don't add power, but they do have a lot of prestige because they're hard to get, and players can spend a lot of time trying to get them.
Right. One quick note, too, before we start to wrap things up here. John, your John, the John that works there. Everybody loves John. He answered a question in the chat that I didn't know you guys could answer yet. But basically, somebody had asked about what was the plan for monetization in the game. What kind of game is this? Is this free to play? Is it a monthly subscription? Like, what's the plan? And he says, won't finalize any of this till later, but we're building around a paid game model. We don't think the free-to-play strategy fits well with our planned game design. Anything you would add to that in terms of why you've come to that, and why maybe you feel like this is better as a retail experience versus some sort of, free-to-play cosmetic, battle pass-based thing like you see in a lot of other games right now?
For the free-to-play model to work, what you need is a really large player base, like millions of players who are probably going to kind of only like your game at a surface level because it's free. Anyone can download, anyone can try it. A lot of them may not like it. And then your hope is that a large enough percentage of those players engage with the cosmetic content to kind of pay for the game for everyone else.
Right.
Our strategy is much more around, we want to make a game for players who really are looking for this kind of game. Like, we don't need to try to get people who hate MMOs to like our game. So we think the right thing to do is say, look, you want to play this game, buy the box, play the game. That's what you get. That's what you're getting your, that's what you're spending your money on, is the content. And then whenever, hopefully within a year, we come out with more content, they can buy more content and play that way. The subscription business is great if you can get it, but you have to have, again, a pretty large player base that's willing to kind of pony that up month after month. And content droughts with that model are really, really awful, because that's when players are like, well, I've seen everything I want to do. I need to like literally unsub from the game because I don't want to keep paying for it. And then there's a bigger barrier to them like coming back.
Yeah.
We're hoping that if we're more of the just pay for the game. Yes, I'm sure we will have cosmetics and battle passes and things on top of that, but we don't want the free-to-play model of like millions of players who are just kind of dabbling with the game.
It is interesting too to see the industry, or at least players, swing the other direction. For a while there became an expectation that if your game wasn't free to play, that somehow they were doing it wrong. If you weren't doing the Fortnite model or something, that you're not gonna make it. And people started wondering why there were even retail games / subscription games, the way Final Fantasy, the way WoW does it. How do they even exist in a free to play world? But I feel like we've come around. Like, we're looking the other way again.
I mean, games are very expensive to make, and I don't think, well, I know that the cost of purchasing a game has not kept up with the cost it takes to make the game. So developers try to be clever about, well, we'll hide the cost and charge you for battle pass, or we'll hide the cost but we'll charge you for extra character slots or whatever. And so after a while, players get tired of the subscription, and then free to play looks attractive. Then they get tired of free to play, and the battle pass looks attractive. Then just like buying the box Helldiver style looks attractive, and it just kind of goes around. So who knows what players will like by the time we ship? But
plus
free to play probably is not the right design for what we're doing.
Sure, I'm personally happy to hear that because that's the model I would prefer. But I know how finicky we can be as players. Also, I know when a company or a developer or a publisher has to change that model midstream, it's not just seen as, oh, it's a business strategy to adhere to the newer market conditions. Players see it as some sort of failure or something. Like they see, oh, this game went free to play. Pfft, you guys are done. Dead game. You know, that all that talk. So it's.
And I get it. Like these type of live service games, particularly MMOs, invite you to spend a lot of time in there. So players want some kind of guarantee that if they spend 100 hours making their character good, like that the game will be around, you know? Right. So I understand why they obsess about that so much. I don't understand it quite so much in games that are not live service. Like, oh, there's only 2,000 people playing Baldur's Gate now. It's a huge failure. It's like,
nope.
There were millions of people playing that game for a long time.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get out of here, I wanted to, you made hints or talked anyway about how, internal play testing is happening. These systems are being tested, talked about, iterated upon, even at this early stage. And we're going to have an upcoming episode to talk more about this with some of the principles involved. Is there anything you want to drop about that that's just kind of tantalizing or exciting? Maybe something you've just seen in your play testing. You're like, oh, that's going to be awesome. And maybe it's all just comes down to blue zones again. I don't know, but I wanted to at least give you an opportunity to drop a bomb if you had one.
The expectation I tried to set with the team the first time we went to external, meaning not employee play testing, was if we just get the servers up, like that's a big success. If we can get people to log in, because everyone knows how many challenges you can have sometimes just logging into an MMO. So I'm like, that's the bar for us. If we can deliver on that, this will benefit success. This is the dress rehearsal, right, for our real play test. Right. But not only did everyone get in, like they all leveled up, and the way our structure works right now is you split up into groups, you do a blue zone or two, and then you come back together to do like an epic raid boss. So you have like 20, 25 players fighting the raid boss. They all got to the raid boss, they killed the raid boss, and they're like, that was fun. So it was unbelievable to me how smooth it all went. The server stayed up. We didn't have problems with people like unable to authenticate. Even though our combat is in its infancy, they're like, I see where it's going. Mm-hmm. Even though we're all using Unreal assets, like they completely look past that. And as MMO players, they're like, yeah, this is a game I'm excited about. Like they're looking forward to coming back and playing more. So I tried to set the bar very low because I didn't want the team to be crushed, but it blew me away in terms of how well it works. I'm really looking forward to doing it again in October.
Oh yeah, I'm excited to hear about that. I'm excited to be a part of it at some point. I want to see how that thing plays.
We'll totally get you. And like I said, I hate this awkward phase where people sign NDAs and they can't talk to their friends about what they played. So because we're so open with our development, I just want to get through that really quickly and then let players talk about it. And if what we hear is them saying, yeah, I like Ghost, but I'm worried about the combat, again, I'd rather know that. So
yeah, there's no good in hiding it, right?
No, there's no good in hiding it. You hide it if like you're not sure what you have is good and you're worried about the bad PR. You hide it if you think like someone's going to come scoop you, which is always a risk, I guess. Sure. But players loving the game is so important. I just don't know how you do that with the big grand reveal of, hey, we made the game, come play it. I hope you like it. Like we'd much rather keep working on it until players are like, dude, this is good. You're ready to ship.
Well, I'm really stoked about it. And I'm excited for future episodes where we get a chance to sit down with some of the folks there and talk more about this phase. Obviously things are still early, but as we get there, we love talking about it, and doing this is just a total blast. Greg, once again, we're at 11 episodes, so we're almost a year of this. I've really enjoyed this year. I hope you have enjoyed it as well.
I'm so glad we were able to pull this off. And I mean, our team has grown, so we've got so many more folks who could come in and talk to you about what they're doing and shine a little light on what it's like to do art or design or coding for Ghost.
Yeah, I'm very excited about all of that. Everybody has been so great, and talking to you today has been amazing. If you're at home and you're like, man, I really want to ask some questions, I got thoughts and feelings, It's easy to do. 801-471-0462 is a phone line. You can leave either a voicemail or a text at. And if you would rather contact us some of the old-fashioned ways, go to fantasticpixelcastle.com. Great ways to contact the folks there. And for this show and finding all the old episodes and where you get your podcasts, that sort of thing, frogpants.com/street for all of that. And we keep the video up as well. So what we did here live is available to everybody in archive format for, well, I guess in perpetuity. So we still have to rely on YouTube to keep it up, I suppose. So anyway, keep that coming. We'd love to hear more from you. Once again, Greg Street, total blast, man. I can't wait to talk to you next time.
Thanks, Scott. I would enjoy it.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Yes. Get more at frogpants.com.
Yeah, we did it. Nice job, everybody. That was awesome. Chat, you guys are great. Great questions today.
Thanks, chat.
Yeah, totally appreciate it. And we'd love to have you here all the time. It's funny at this stage. It's like, if this was a launch game, if you were like, let's say this was launch month, we'd have potentially hundreds of thousands of people in this chat room right now, because I know that's where this is headed. But when we're in this stage of like, well, they're working on it, and here's the stuff we're doing, we get this nice trickle, and they're all very cool and engaged and stuff. I just want them to remember that when things really blow up, we're not going to forget you when you were here early on. All right? You guys are awesome. So thanks for that.
I love that. Yeah, I love this phase when it's still kind of casual. I feel like the wave is building, and I think this game could be really big, but I'm going to enjoy this part because it's fun.
Enjoy it while we got it. Well, awesome. Greg, thanks, man. It's always good. Take care of them chickens, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, Faye. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody involved. And if you are listening right now and you're thinking, hey, I sure like some more stuff today, a little bit later today, let's see, 2 hours from now, the PlayStation State of Play event is happening. We're going to do a live simulcast with me and the Core Boys, so me and Bo and John, talking about whatever PlayStation's got planned today. So if you want to watch along with us, we would love to have you there. Okay? So come on by and be a part of it. All right, I think that's it for us. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.